Okay, I think we're good to go. Maybe just wait another second or two for everyone to come in. But thank you everyone for joining us this morning, this afternoon, this evening, depending on where you are. We'll just wait another minute or two and then we'll go ahead and get started. Okay, so I think we'll go ahead and begin now. So again, good morning, good afternoon, good evening to everyone, depending on where in the world you're joining us from today. I know on the panel, at least we have more than one time zone. My name is Ryan Zohar. I'm the librarian of the Middle East Institute's Oman Library, and I want to welcome everyone here today to our panel entitled Area Studies, the Cold War, and the History of U.S. Academic Library Collections. This discussion brings together current and former Middle East Studies librarians Michael Albin, William Kupecki, and Joan Weeks from the United States Library of Congress and its overseas offices to discuss the history, impact, and enduring legacy of Cold War era acquisitions programs and how they continue to shape how knowledge is produced on the region within American academia today. More specifically, our panelists will draw from their experiences acquiring or curating collections of Middle East materials purchased through Public Law 480 or its successor programs. This panel explores the curious and little known connection between U.S. agricultural aid and research library collections. As a little bit of background about Public Law 480, before we begin, United States Public Law 83-480, the Agricultural Trade Development and Assistance Act of 1954, also known as the Food for Peace Act, or briefly PL 480, was born out of Cold War era US foreign policy and still endures in some ways to today. The program, first introduced under the Eisenhower administration, saw the United States sell surplus agricultural products to friendly countries on concessional or grant terms. As part of the program, which was strengthened under the Kennedy and Johnson administrations with the founding of USAID, foreign governments could pay for US surplus food products using their own local currency rather than US dollars. So as the United States accumulated large amounts of foreign nations' local currencies that could not be easily spent, a group of librarians led by Mortimer Graves lobbied Congress to allow for the Library of Congress to make use of a portion of these funds to acquire materials from overseas for US research libraries. This resulted in an amendment to the law to allow for, quote, the acquisition of books, periodicals, and other materials and the deposit thereof in libraries and research centers in the United States, specializing in the areas to which they relate, end quote. What came next was a veritable explosion in the acquisitions of overseas and foreign language materials for US research libraries. Revenues from the Food for Peace Act were used to purchase books by the Library of Congress's overseas offices in Cairo, Islamabad, Jakarta, and elsewhere. They then made their way to major academic institutions across the United States. In his writing on the subject, historian Alex Boudreaucas provides one small snapshot of the impact of these programs. He writes, quote, in 1941, a survey of members of the Association of Research Libraries concluded that approximately 31,710 Arabic volumes were held in the United States, and that by 1980, the PL 480 program had imported more than 4.3 million Arabic language items from across the Middle East, often comprising more than 90% of university collections, end quote. Many of these books and serials form the core of important area studies collections in the United States, and they continue to shape the way that knowledge is produced within Middle East studies today. Importantly, they also include more difficult to collect materials like now or never items or gray literature. While the story of PL 480 and the cooperative acquisitions programs that succeeded it are not unique to the Middle East, our panelists will address their work in the region from and within working within Middle East studies in particular. Each of our panelists will speak for approximately 10 to 15 minutes. Following this, I'll moderate a roundtable discussion about the presentations guided by a number of questions. But I also want to make sure that we have enough time to allow for questions from our audience to guide the discussion today. So while the chat function today is closed, please feel free to submit your questions using the Q&A feature at any time, and we'll compile them and start to go through them in the latter portion of today's event. So without further ado, I'm happy to introduce our first speaker, Michael Albin. Michael Albin was field director of the Library of Congress office in Cairo from 1975 to 1985. Upon his return to Washington, he held several positions, including acting chief of the Asian Division, founding head of the Japan Documentation Center, and director for acquisitions. He retired in 2004. Thank you, Mike. The floor is yours.
All right, thank you very much. Ryan, it's a pleasure to be here, and thank the Middle East Institute for mounting this review of Public Law 480 and its impact on library acquisitions and scholarship. Ryan was kind enough to provide a list of subtopics of interest to Middle Eastern scholars and to the general public. He thought of including me on the panel because of my 10-year residency as field director of the Library of Congress Acquisitions Office in Cairo and my subsequent career at the library. Taking Ryan's provocative questions as my guide, I discussed three main issues. First, Public Law 480 and its relation to U.S. foreign policy. Second, operations of the Cairo office during my tenure there. And finally, some observations about the impact of the Cairo office on professional development of librarians in Egypt and in Arab countries. The link between PL 480 and the Cold War can be disposed of quickly. It is customary nowadays to seek nefarious purpose in American engagement with the Mideast. There is no doubt that the Food for Peace program was part of our overall use of soft power in our confrontation with the Soviet Union during the Cold War. It is no exaggeration to say that every US move, military, cultural, or diplomatic, was predicated upon this relationship. The use of blocked foreign currencies, in this case, Egyptian pounds, was an imaginative way of funding the acquisition and processing of books, magazines, newspapers, and other media from Egypt and the Middle East. The library's acquisitions program was only one of several activities funded by US-owned Egyptian pounds. I could list them here, but there's not time to expand on these beneficial educational, academic, and medical research activities. So yes, Food for Peace was tied to the Cold War in those days, and the Library of Congress's Cairo office depended on Egyptian pound payments for its agricultural imports from the founding of the office in 1963 until the funds ran out in the late 1970s. Cairo from 1975 to 1985. Let's forget the background noise of foreign currencies and geopolitics and move to the real work of the Cairo office: acquisitions, cataloging, and cooperative acquisitions. Acquiring Middle Eastern material was the core of our work, and it was the most intriguing part of my job because it brought me into daily, intense contact with Egyptian writers, journalists, librarians, publishers, and booksellers. Every month, hundreds of books came into the office proposed by our dealers for selection for the Library of Congress and for 30 or so other member libraries. Dr. Saad al-Hagrassi and I reviewed every title for its conformity to the library's collection policies, accepting one copy for the library or multiple copies for the participating libraries. Many times we rejected titles for distribution to any of the libraries for a variety of reasons. After the books were selected, they would be cataloged by a staff of 5 catalogers according to Library of Congress detailed rules. While this was taking place, the dealers went into the market to buy and deliver the required number of copies for the program. The books were delivered to the shipping room where their physical completeness was checked. Remember, printing in those days in Egypt was not an exacting art. The copies were then wrapped and prepared for shipment through the embassy's US Post Office facility. Magazines and newspaper subscriptions were handled in the same way. Let me digress for a minute and tell what to me is an amusing story. One day, we had a visit of a congressional delegation headed by Congressman Lucian Nedzi of Michigan. We toured Congressman Nedzi around the office, and he was duly impressed with the organization of the place. And we ended the tour in the shipping room, where there was a series of pigeonholes where we distributed the publications to the 30 or so libraries. Library of Congress was pigeonhole number 1, Harvard was number 2, Yale was 3, and so forth and so on. Congressman Nedzi noted that University of Michigan at Ann Arbor was number 5, and this didn't please him very much. And he turned to me and he said, "Is there any way we could bump University of Michigan up higher in the distribution list?" I said, "Well, no, sir. This was established, the distribution was established early on in the history of the office, and I myself can't change the distribution pattern." And he said, "Well, that's too bad. Let me see, would a law help you do that?" And I said, yes, Congressman, I think a law would probably do the trick. The second chapter of the story during my tenure began toward the late 1970s with warnings that PL 480 funds were running low and would not be replenished. Planning began in our office in Cairo, at LC in Washington, and among the participating libraries to continue operations on a reimbursable basis. Most, if not all, of the 30 participants opted to continue receiving publications. Cairo established book selection and accounting procedures to refine selection and ensure that federally appropriated funds were used exclusively for LC publications. At that point, the Middle East Cooperative Acquisitions Program was formed and succeeded the PL 480 funding. It offered at least 3 advantages. It gave each library control over the countries and subjects of interest to them. And it allowed Cairo staff, including me, to travel more widely in the region and pay for our purchases with US dollars. Up until that time, we had limited access to Arabic material published outside of Egypt because we had access only to Egyptian currency, and no other Arab country wanted Egyptian currency. In those PL 480 days, we had to wait for the annual Cairo International Book Fair to review and select non-Egyptian publications. Our work in Cairo would have been impossible without the goodwill of colleagues in the Egyptian library and publishing community. The first and greatest acknowledgement goes to Dr. Sadat Hagrassi, our bibliographic consultant and Dean of Cairo University's Library School. Through Dr. Hagrassi's energy and good offices, we maintained close professional relations not only with the University of Cairo and its departments and other Egyptian universities, but also with the National Library of Egypt and the Arab League's educational, cultural, and scientific organization known as Alexo. This giving back helps explain the successful continuous operation of the office. In summing up, the PL 480 and MECAP, that is Middle East Cooperative Acquisitions programs, enriched and continue to enrich US academic libraries with thousands of books and periodical titles that would not have otherwise been available to them. Books arrive in the libraries, in the participating libraries, cataloged, bound, and pretty much ready for the shelves. I can't help but think that scholars and students take advantage of this material for their studies and research. One thing is certain, the office could not have made this contribution to scholarship without the cooperation and support of the Egyptian government, the hundreds of Egyptian booksellers, librarians, authors, publishers, and friends, and the dedication and loyalty and professional competence of the library staff in Cairo. As I hand the floor over to William, I have no doubt that the Cairo office will continue to provide academic libraries with essential access to Middle Eastern publications, bi'Iznillah ta'ala. Thank you.
Thank you, Mike, for that wonderful window into the Cairo office. Our next speaker, William Kupecki, will in many ways continue this thread for us, I think. William Kupecki is the field director for the Library of Congress's overseas office in Nairobi, Kenya, and acting field director for the Cairo office, where he served in a full-time capacity from 2009 to 2022. Prior to that, he was a Middle East bibliographer, the Middle East bibliographer and head of Middle East Technical Services at University of Pennsylvania Libraries from 2003 to 2009. Since 2004, he has been the secretary treasurer for the Middle East Librarians Association, MILA. Thank you, William. The floor is yours.
Okay, thank you very much, Ryan, and thank you to you and your colleagues at Middle East Institute for this invitation and opportunity to speak. And I would also like to thank Mike Albin for his remarks about his time in Cairo. And I hope I'm going to continue that thread with minimal redundancy about the importance of Cairo office, the MACAP program, and our dedicated local staff, without whom the program would not be what it is. So just as a quick introduction, as Mike explained, as PL 480 funds stopped in the late 1970s, Congress had made some legislative changes that essentially allowed the Library of Congress to morph into a new program, that is the Cooperative Acquisitions Program. And this program differed from PL 480 in that the offices operated with appropriated funds authorized by Congress, while participants in the CAP program had to pay for what they received. It also mandated that there would have to be a better codification of selection criteria. And instead of every participant having to receive every book and newspaper acquired or magazine acquired by the program, there should be regulations for better selectivity. So in this framework, my comments here will continue talking about the operational aspects of Cairo Overseas Office and the work that the local staff do to support the Middle East Cooperative Acquisitions Program called MACAP. Just to give you a quick context, here are the overseas offices as they are today. You have Rio, Nairobi, Jakarta, New Delhi, and Islamabad, each with their countries of coverage. Here is Cairo office. More upfront is specifically what Cairo office covers. So everything as far west as Mauritania, to Oman, to Turkey, to Sudan, and everything else in between. Just as when the office first started, the primary functions remain the same. In my view, these are to acquire library materials, to catalog them, and to ship them, which I've come to appreciate over the years as the less appreciated aspects of the office. None of this, just as Mike said, could have happened without the support of our host country government of Egypt, and it especially could not have happened without generations of talented and local Egyptian staff who have worked for the library. So in the top photo here, you can see Ahmed Ramadan, who was a library clerk. This photo is from 1962, shortly after the office first opened. And in the middle there is Lawrence Quincy Mumford, the Librarian of Congress. And here's the first field director, Donald J. Ahmed worked in the Cairo office until the late 1990s. After he retired, immigrated to the United States, and he now continues work as a cataloger at Yale University Library. And in the photo below is, of course, Mike Albin there from 1976 with the rest of Cairo office staff at that time. And at that time, the office was not physically located inside the US Embassy in Cairo. And at that time, the office benefited greatly from the consultancy of Dr. Saad Hagrassi, who was professor of library science at Cairo University, who helped support the office's efforts to fully catalog the material they acquired. Here's what we look like today. There's 34 local staff and 1 US field director. And our location is inside the US Embassy for various reasons, but not the least of which is security over the past 20 or so years. Now let's talk a little bit about the Middle East Cooperative Acquisitions Program. So back then, under PL 480, there were 30 participants at its peak. Under MACAP, there's now 45 libraries from mostly from North America. MACAP differs from PL 480 in that this is a cost-sharing program. When joining the program, a participant tells us what they want the office to acquire. Usually it's country of publication and subject, or else we do offer firm orders, as we usually circularize via email lists newly acquired books. So we take that amount, we come up with an estimated cost for materials. Participants can also elect to have their books and serials bound. We do the binding in Cairo before shipping them, and participants also pay their share of shipping both inbound from the country of origin to Cairo, and then once again to from Cairo to their destination. And a small percentage that we call indirect and overhead charges are added to the costs of materials to cover things like supplies, staff time dedicated to CAP matters, and so forth. So once we have that invoice, the invoice gets sent out to the participating libraries, and they pay that into a deposit account. And then as we start acquiring materials for them and invoking charges, we draw down from those deposit accounts. Any discounts that we happen to gain in acquisitions are passed along to participants. And then at the end of the fiscal year, a cost recovery process takes place that determines the indirect and overhead rates for the next fiscal year. So in short, the more materials we acquire for our MACAP participants, and trusting that we're able to keep our operating expenses under relative control, we're also then able to keep those indirect and overhead charges at a reasonable rate. Participants are therefore able to select more granularly the topics they wish to collect in, or they can specify which newspapers, magazines, or other academic journals they require. In short, then, Cairo and the other overseas offices are able to operate thanks to the existing funding that Library of Congress receives from Congress to maintain these offices, and then the participants benefit from the program through their buy-in. So in short, if we get, we're already present in Egypt and the other 5 overseas offices, and if we get one copy of a book for Library of Congress, it doesn't take that much more effort to get a second copy for Harvard, a third copy for Penn, a fourth copy for UCLA, and so forth. And that is the benefit of the cooperative. Just to give you some recent statistics in this COVID era, this is what we acquire for MACAP participants on an annual basis. So in 2019, you can see there's 18,304 monograph pieces. A piece here is defined as a volume, and 18,069 serial pieces for MACAP participants. And in this picture, you can see Yasser, who is the deputy section head in the monograph section, reviewing multiple copy selections for MACAP participants. Finally, we have, honestly, the work of the office could not be done without 2 pillars of subject and format matter experts. So on the left here, you can see Mr. Khalid Riyad, head of monograph acquisitions. He's been with the office for nearly 25 years. His knowledge of the publishing industry, accumulated knowledge of a variety of subjects related to Arabic and Islamic studies in particular, and not to mention a near photographic memory of what has been acquired and what has been rejected, is, in my opinion, unmatched by anyone else working in Middle East acquisition librarianship. And with his knowledge, he has successfully navigated a very complicated and sometimes competitive field to ensure that the right materials are being selected for MACAP libraries and thus building their collections. And on the right here, you have Mr. Ahmed Mustafa, who is head of serials, shipping and binding, who has 20 years of experience managing serials in the office. Ahmed is, in my opinion, is probably the foremost expert on serial and newspaper publishing in the region, following our unofficial rule that states that the value of a serials collection in a library is directly related to how complete a given title's run is. In other words, if there are missing issues that are otherwise available, we must collect them by any means necessary. And so to acquire these materials, Khaled and Ahmed both make regular acquisition trips to other countries in the region. They visit book fairs. This photo happened to be taken at Sharjah Book Fair in the United Arab Emirates last November. They visit publishing houses, and they engage with a wide network of local suppliers and bibliographic representatives working with us in each of the 22 countries we cover to ensure that a steady stream of materials are collected each year. Just to give you an example of acquisition trends. So here you can see Khaled and some of the things he and his staff work to acquire. In this photo here, he's visiting an Egyptian Armenian organization to acquire relevant publications on the community in Egypt. In this picture, you can see some Kurdish publications from Syria, which are just starting to emerge after a long absence. And down here, lower right, are Arabic publications from Turkey, which are also starting to increase in recent years. And bottom left are Libyan publications that have also started increasing due to changing trends in the field of publishing and distribution for that country. For his part, Ahmed works to maintain 3,500 magazines, academic journals, and newspapers throughout the region. In this picture here on the left is him in Morocco, taken just 2 weeks ago when he was there on an acquisitions trip. And here, this somewhat older snap picture of the office shows how we organize the serials for participant libraries. So we arrange things by title, and then when we receive, say, 4 issues of an academic journal, then we send it out to the binder to get bound. Once the materials are acquired and brought back to Cairo, they have to be processed and cataloged. And in this regard, Cairo office is continuing the tradition that was established by Mike Albin and with the consultancy of Dr. Hagrassi. Our cataloging staff now perform full descriptive and subject cataloging for everything we acquire, basically performing the same function as their counterparts in the Library of Congress's divisions in Washington, D.C. We are working in the same systems. When a book is newly cataloged, it goes live to the Library of Congress online catalog. A significant number of receipts leave the office shelf ready for Library of Congress and make have participant benefit, and we make those bibliographic records available then for use in their own library catalogs. So here in the upper left, you see Salma, Aziza, and Fatima. In the middle here is Muhammad, Afifi, and Mustafa. And here they represent the Arabic cataloging team. And then here are our non-Arabic cataloging specialists. Here's Ines, who deals with Turkey, Livan, who deals with Armenian, and Farid, who deals with Kurdish. Final process is the shipping. And just like Mike mentioned about the cubby holes of the past, they still exist, albeit within compact shelving. Every participant has a number. And because not all the participants receive the same volume of materials, we try to accumulate for each one of them until they reach a desired weight. Until 2010, we used to be able to send things back using the United States Military Post Office. And then at some point in 2010, actually, they said, sorry, we can't allow you to use this service. So we had to find alternative means, which now involve commercial couriers whose rates we've negotiated fiercely to get the best benefits for Library of Congress and our MACAP participants. And honestly, shipping is really a neglected aspect of our work because because in the Middle East region, it is still largely a print culture. So our work has to think, when we think of things like from farm to table, it's the same thing here. We have to think of how are we going to get a book from a publisher, get them consolidated through, let's say, a representative or a local vendor, and basically move that pallet of paper out of the country into Egypt, where we do what we need to do from cataloging and processing. And then how do we get a new subset of those materials back out to Library of Congress, Washington, and the other 45 MACAP participants. So it's really moving, moving pallets of paper from one country to another, but not just any pallets of paper. It's making sure that the participants get exactly what they required for their profiles or for their firm orders, and getting there safely in one piece. So here you can see Atif. He is our packer, and he's worked for with the office for more than 30 years. And in the lower right hand is Ahmed loading up a DHL truck with a shipment for participants. In short, if we look here, this is the Thomas Jefferson building, and this is the inside dome of the building. Here you can see that from the inception, America and Egypt have been side by side. And I feel this really symbolically describes the partnership that Library of Congress enjoys with our host country of Egypt. So the takeaway points I'd like to leave you with here are that the mission of the Cairo office and the MACAP program, even from PL 480 days to present, could not have happened without the dedication and hard work of local Egyptian staff and consultants that have appeared throughout the years. And these same Egyptian professional staff have, either directly through official outreach from Cairo office or unofficially through their own means, have contributed an incredible amount of technical knowledge to the library of community, not only in Egypt, but in other countries in the region. MACAP participant libraries have benefited from Cairo office's presence, whereby the staff, people like Khalid and Ahmed, are serving as the consistent eyes and ears for publishing in the region. MACAP participants are very much a partner in this process, and with their active participation and feedback, Cairo office is able to serve them according to their needs. In this way, the office has, since 1962, played a steady and consistent role in helping build the national collection of Middle East publications. Thank you.
Thank you, William, for shedding light on how PL 480's successor, MACAP, has come to shape cooperative acquisitions programs for Middle East material. And thank you, too, for that focus on the incredible efforts of the Egyptian professionals at the Cairo office. I've opened up many of those boxes, and it's funny to see them from the other side. But I agree with you that this question of how our books get to us sometimes yields some fascinating insights and stories. I remember previously when I was opening some of these boxes from vendors, not necessarily the LC offices, looking at the circuitous routes that books sometimes take from Iranian vendors, or the difficulties of getting shipments regularly from certain vendors in countries with political instability. So I think that that's an important side of the equation that doesn't get enough
right,
airtime.
and that's our role, is to manage with those issues so that you don't have to.
Sure. Thank you again. With our next speaker, Joan Weeks, we'll shift slightly from Cairo to Washington, D.C. and the Library of Congress's Near East section. Joan Weeks is head of the Near East section and Turkic area specialist in the African and Middle Eastern division, Ahmed, at the Library of Congress. She joined Ahmed in 2015. She supervises a staff of 7, including Arab, Persian, and American specialists, reference librarians, and library technicians, as well as volunteers with responsibility to acquire, process, and serve the Near East collections. Prior to this, she was a senior instruction librarian in the Cooperative and Instructional Programs Division, where she designed and taught collection processing courses to library staff. Before coming to the Library of Congress, she worked with a Turkish association. She holds an MA in International Studies with a Middle East and Turkic specialization from American University, and an MA in Education from Marshall University, and an MLIS from Catholic University. Thank you so much, Joan.
Thank you so much, Ryan, for this opportunity. And thank you to the Middle East Institute colleagues for all the background logistics. I know what it takes to put these programs together, and it's so appreciated. And today I want to pick up where William left us off underneath the dome. Right here, you see the dome to the Library of Congress, and he was showing that inside part with the collaboration between America and Egypt. And I want to take us under the dome, but also take us into the future about the digital collections. And so I'm going to look at the Near East section from 1945 in its inception through and how PL 480 impacted the section and moving forward until today. So I wanted to point out where we are in the context for our participants today and show that the Library of Congress, the dome here, is across the street from the US Capitol. And we're particularly along this line. We have three buildings in the complex. There's the James Madison building that is primarily where the books come from the Cairo office in boxes for final processing and shelving. And then we have the John Adams building, which used to be called the Annex, but stores many of the book collections, and we're located right next to the Supreme Court. And a more close-up view, here's the Supreme Court, now kind of cordoned off with fencing, but right here along this side facing the court is our reading room. And here is the current Middle Eastern, African and Middle Eastern Division reading room in the Jefferson Building. We have researchers just outside my door that come in from all over the world to use these Middle East collections. And I want to show you what it was like. The Near East section was created in 1945, and it was called the Orientalia Division at that time. And it also included what is now the Asian Division. And this was spurred on by the outcome of World War II. There was a great interest in peoples of the Near East. And this showed the need in libraries for extensive and reliable information. And here we see what the cataloging looked like at that point, rather dimly lit, but the colleagues looking through the materials and processing them. The Near East section at that point was given custody of materials in over 40 languages that include North Africa, the Middle East, the Caucasus, Central Asia. And the main linguistic groups that we cover, all of the Arabic context that William showed, we also cover the Armenian, Georgian through the Caucasus, Turkic, Persian, and the Central Asian, Turkic, and Iranic languages. They're the former Soviet republics. So how did we start acquiring Near East collections? There were a lot of challenges with this. By 1951, the Joint Committee on Southern Asia of the American Council of Learned Societies and the Social Sciences Research Council recognized the problems that were emerging with Near East studies. There were a lot of materials that were needed in libraries, and staff were very unfamiliar with the languages. And that problem actually persists until today. There was also, I think William highlighted a lot of this prior to this, were disorganization of book vendors, very difficult to acquire materials in the languages. So as both my other colleagues pointed out, in 1954, this seminal legislation that Eisenhower signed, the Agricultural Trade and Development Assistance Act, or Food for Peace, PL 480. It enabled food deficit friendly countries to purchase agricultural commodities with their local currency. And then the US used these currencies to pay for these economic development projects inside these countries. And some of these were food for peace, some of the care programs, milk feeding projects, all sorts of projects that were used. But how did it come and get into the library world? Well, in 1957, there was a conference on the American Library Resources for Southern Asia that was held at the Library of Congress. And there were many proposals and resolutions. And finally, it came out the money available in the Wheat Loan Interest Fund in India would be allocated to purchase Indian documents for American research centers. And by 1958, there was the passage of the Dingell Amendment to PL 480 that provided for the procurement of a broad range of scholarly publications using the local currencies from the sale of agricultural surpluses. And with this, the Library of Congress was designated to serve as the agent. And with the inception of $84,000 designated to procure all the publications of central and state governments of India to 3 research institutions, the University of Pennsylvania, the Midwest Center was Chicago, and the University of California for the West. Now, moving forward, several requests for subsequent appropriations for Congress finally resulted in August 1961 in the Senate House Conference Committee approving a program to acquire publications from India, Pakistan, and what was known as Egypt at that time, the UAR, for universities that accepted the invitation to participate and agreed to a yearly $500 fee. And now, as William has talked about it, it's on a cost recovery basis. So in November and December of 1961, the Library of Congress teams were working on arrangements with American embassies and book dealers, as well as recruiting staff. In January 1962, the first shipments went out from the field offices in India and Pakistan and reached the recipient libraries in March. Also, as William has pointed out, we had the Cairo office established, and as he has pointed out, are the regional center for processing materials acquired from all of what is traditionally known as the Middle East and North Africa. Now, these materials came into the Library of Congress, and they were centrally cataloged on cards through the 1960s, and recipient libraries could purchase the cards through the cataloging distribution service. Where are we today with this? Well, machine readable cataloging came into play in the 1980s. And many of the cards in the Library of Congress using Roman scripts were converted to the online catalog by a contractor. This did not include the cards with the non-Roman scripts. There have been cleanup projects that continue until today. And today, since August of last year, I've had a shelf-by-shelf project going on with the Arabic technician to identify which books are not in the catalog. And these are not in the modern catalog. They were cataloged from the overseas. These are in Arabic. They were cataloged by the Cairo office on cards, and we're finding some that have still not been entered into the modern cataloging system. So we're trying to clean up those. We also had materials coming in from the Cairo's office in the 1980s and 1990s that aren't directly cataloged in the online catalog, but they used what we call Library of Congress Romanization. So instead of the Arabic script, letters in a Romanized alphabet were assigned to any of the Arabic characters. But very interestingly, by 2007, catalogers can enter the vernacular scripts into the online catalog. So here we have Kitab. Here is a full record now that displays the script. Why do we care about that? We're trying to provide access and discovery of the collections so that you, the researchers around the world, can discover the collections And we, as the librarians, can provide them to you for research. So some other things that have been some challenges are the preservation. So we've had this newspaper microfilming project that I talk about from 2020 to 2021. This during the pandemic has been an excellent year for processing the backlog. These have come in from the Cairo office in the boxes of newspapers. And we take those out. We have microfilm records prepared. And then these are converted into reels of microfilm. And this was very beneficial. We also had boxes, over 437 boxes of periodicals on newsprint. These periodicals, it's difficult in the Middle East to get paper for high quality glossy printed journals. So many times they're printed on newsprint, and we've had those processed. So the microfilm reels, they're very popular in our reading room. And we have put on these 45,000 reels of newspapers. We put what we call the summary statement. What is on that particular reel when you request it? So for this one, we have holdings from 1982 through 1998. This is so valuable for researchers who are planning to come to the library to see if we have the dates that they need for their research. Now, storing the collections. We had a massive influx from our overseas offices, very amazing collections, but it's been an incredible challenge to shelve them on the decks that are up here on Capitol Hill. They've opened some offsite storage space at Cabin Branch. And since 2017, we've sent over 81,000 monographs. These are the items that it looks like Bob's Furniture Warehouse. And they've only taken single volume monographs because they have barcoded, pinned, and linked, and put in each box. It's a random assortment of books, but there's a system where when you make a request, it will identify which box in which area of this massive area, this cherry picker arrangement, the staff go there, pick it off, take it down to this, the lone computer, and they can input, find the book. Maybe there's 15 or 20 in that box, and they take that book out and send it to our reading room, and then the box is put back up on the shelf. Now, these are listed in our catalog as stored off-site and can require up to 2 days to bring here to use in the reading room. Also, when I came in 2015, there were boxes and boxes of bound periodicals that needed to have holding statements created. So our staff have created over 56,000 serial bound volumes and labeled those. They put the barcodes, and now they're shelved on site and available for researchers. They aren't taken to Cabin Branch because it would necessitate putting 2 or 3 bound periodicals in each box, and it would be so difficult to get 10 or 15 boxes together to provide a range of serials. So those are still shelved here on Capitol Hill. Now, just trying to entice everyone to come into the library and use our Near East collections. You're welcome in. You just need to bring a photo ID and obtain a reader card in the Jefferson building. And actually, when I was an instruction librarian, I designed this. It's my son and daughter, and I turned the picture into blue. So it's just a generic thing, and it's still in use here. So you get this reader card, and then you can come into the African and Middle Eastern Reading Room on LJ 229 on the 2nd floor. You search in the catalog. We are encouraging appointments because, as I said, a lot of the materials are stored off-site, could take 2 days to come in. And if you come in just walking in, we'll try to assist you. We'll help you request these. But with an appointment, we can contact you, identify what you want to see, and have it ready for you when you come on site. here we are. I would like to meet the African and Middle Eastern Division staff. We do have 3 sections. Our African section covers all of sub-Saharan Africa. Our Hebraic section covers Israel, but also Hebraica worldwide. We have our administrative team. Dr. Lanisa Kitchener is the chief of the division. She's an Africana specialist. We have Monique Dawson, who is our admin officer. Dr. Edward Miner is head of the African section. Aji Ho is our project manager. Here I am as head of the Near East section. And now to introduce the Near East section. Abdullahi Ahmed is a Somali expert, but he is the collection librarian behind the scenes who's getting and managing all the newspaper issues. We've got not only from the Cairo office, we've got Iraqi war newspapers, and they lack cataloging records. So we're taking them to cataloging. We're getting them fully prepared. Hoda Dayton is our new Arab world specialist. She is from originally Saudi Arabia and has provided a full range of reference services for the Arab world. Harad Dinavari is our Persianate specialist. We do get our Persianate collections from the Islamabad and New Delhi offices, and the newspapers as well as bound periodicals, and he's been working on all of the collections, the ones I'm pointing out from the Arab world that are not processed. He's helping with the ones from the Persianate world that are not processed, and the rare collections he's having digitized. Crystal Grant is the person behind the scenes processing those microfilm reels, so they tell you which versions we have. Dr. Kachik Muradi is our Armenian specialist, Georgian world specialist, with a full range of collection development, as well as providing reference services and specialty with the rare manuscript collections. And Dr. Mohammed Salhi is our Arab world specialist with expertise in the rare manuscripts, as well as for the full range of Arab world newspapers. We've made a LibGuide so that it makes it more discoverable for those. And Emma Stevens is the technician behind opening up those boxes of bound periodicals and providing those summary statements for all of those. Now, if you can't come in, alternatively now, you can put in an interlibrary loan request from your library. We get frequently from our MCAT libraries, as well as others from all around the world, for many of the materials that are unique to the collections here. Here's one I had recently. It was a rare Ottoman Turkish item, and I was able to photocopy that little tiny pamphlet and email the PDF to the library for the patron. Also, we want you to connect. We've got major digitization projects, anything that's not under copyright protection and public facing. This includes many of the materials that are no longer under copyright restrictions. When you come just to collections, you can see everything, but I encourage you to go through and specifically say, do you want books, or do you want manuscripts, or photos, or maps? So many of those things are accessible in a digital format, and you can just simply download the images. We also digitized a rare calligraphy sheet collection that a lot through the Middle East studies are very interested in these. So it's important to search through these. They're in Persian, Ottoman Turkish, and Arabic, of course. We also do web archiving and collaborate with the Cairo and Islamabad office on this, the capture of websites from the Middle East countries. We more recently did the websites connected to COVID-19, including governmental NGOs, but we also earlier on have a huge collection of the Arab Spring web archiving. These are ephemeral, they disappear, so it's so important to capture these and provide this. And we are collaborating with the Islamabad office on many from the Central Asian countries. Also, I want to point out to our users that a lot of our collections come into electronic databases that find things throughout the Near East vendors. We do subscribe to a number of databases, but if you put in eresources.gov, you can find a lot of these have free access, and we have Middle Eastern studies specified out. So you can see here that you can just go in and use this from wherever you are and get access to periodicals, some documentation. Some also say on-site only. So those would require coming into the reading room directly. Now, our goal has been to make more collections available online. These periodicals that were on newsprint, we had the opportunity to send these to be digitized, and there's this massive online database system. It's behind the firewall. You have to come in on site to use it, but they're for all the materials that are still under copyright, and they're fully digitized. We sent 45 titles with over 3,000 issues that are now digitized in stacks. And these were the periodicals from throughout the Middle East. I also want to point out our blog gives you a special insight into some of our more interesting collections. And we also are on Facebook. We're trying to get you to connect to us. To me, the most important thing, my takeaway is we're making these collections discoverable. And now I hope you will discover them and connect with the Middle East collections that have come through all of this work that was spurred on by PL 480, and come in and reap the benefit of all of these collections. And there's my contact information. I'm always happy to entertain your questions and look forward to discussion with my colleagues. Thank you very much for listening.
Thank you so much, Joan. I'm glad you were able to walk us through the history of PL 480 and touch on a number of projects at the Near East Collection. I'll also just add that the trials and tribulations of working with Romanized metadata is a particular obsession of mine. So I'm glad you were able to discuss the movement towards vernacular script data. I want to turn to a couple of questions to help guide our discussion. And I think what I'll do is I'll start by asking one question to each of our panelists, and then we'll get to some broader questions followed by our audience questions. So keep the Q&A questions coming in. We'll be happy to take them during this portion of the talk. But I want to start with Mike, and thank you again for walking us through the story of the Cairo office. You gave some hints about some of these stories during your time in Cairo, but throughout the oral history interviews you participated in as part of the Foreign Affairs Oral History Project, you discuss how different political and historical events in the Middle East shaped the contours of your work. You worked in Egypt throughout the Infitah, and later during Anwar al-Sadat's assassination, for example. In these same interviews, you also described collecting from Libyan and Maltese, or collecting Libyan and Maltese materials in times of particular political tension. And these included things like ephemera and gray literature. I was wondering if you might be able to speak to us a little bit about what you see as some of the major events during the period you were working at the Cairo office and how they impacted your work at the LC office overseas. And William, if you want to jump in as well, I know you were there in 2011. If that's something that you want to touch on as well, feel free. So Mike, thanks. Mike, I think you're muted. Apologies. There you go.
In terms of acquisitions, the seismic change was the depletion of PL 480 money and the beginning of the reimbursable program, which gave us access to US dollars. And so in terms of acquisitions, cataloging, and then the entire operation, it opened the region to us across the board from the Atlantic all the way to Turkey. you mentioned Malta, for example. Malta was not a traditional, or is not a traditional component of the generally recognized Middle East. However, an opportunity to travel there once or twice opened up when Muammar Gaddafi's regime became extremely brotherly with the leftist regime in Malta, and the Libyans opened a bookstore and cultural center there. So it gave me the opportunity to visit Malta, to collect publications, not only from the Libyans, which had been from Libya, which had been closed to us for a number of reasons, and but also to survey the scene in Malta. What happened when I discovered in Malta was that the Libyan Cultural Center, which was practically empty of readers, I might add, did have what looked to me like a complete set of Gaddafian propaganda, and only propaganda. There were no general interest publications. So I acquired whatever I could from that from that collection of Libyan government publications, and I took the occasion to survey Malta. I'm not sure, William can correct me here, whether Malta ever became part of a regular acquisitions schedule of visits or not, but that was the opening of Malta to our acquisitions, which leads me to another topic, perhaps a broader, more interesting topic for just a second, and that is gray literature. Gray literature can be defined as material which is neither commercially published nor secret, governmental, held confidentially and published confidentially by governments. It's gray. It's in between white and black, so it's gray. In any case, gray literature was always conceived of by me as fair game. So the Gaddafian literature in Malta, because it wasn't considered commercial, could have been considered gray. More germane to our general activities was gray literature in Egypt and the other Arab countries. We in Cairo, regardless of PO 480 funding or subsequent MECAP funding, we made an effort to collect all kinds of gray literature from political parties, from whoever was distributing publications, newspapers, broadsheets on the streets. We would pick up and prepare for microfilming or send to Washington for processing as groups of gray material. How that's stored nowadays at the library in Washington, I don't know, but we did collect this stuff. The political parties, when they were allowed to operate, we picked those materials up as well. The Infitah, Sadat's Infitah of the 1970s, opened up for a short period of time some publications that were perhaps under Sadat's earlier years, and certainly under Nasser's years verboten. And so we picked those materials up as well, publications, pamphlets, newspapers, and so forth, for the Muslim Brotherhood, for example, or from leftist parties. That sort of thing was available to us. So certainly, to answer your question, finally, the most salient but not library related event in my tenure in Cairo was Sadat's visit to Jerusalem. That changed the texture of life in Cairo. It opened up a huge openness. That's what infitah means, the opening, the open door. And it, in addition to opening the economy of Egypt, which was what Sadat aimed at, it also opened up the political atmosphere for a short time. I might also mention in closing that I was on a TDY, a temporary duty assignment on contract to the library in 2007, well after my retirement, to substitute for the field director who had left. So I spent, I don't know, 2 or 3 months in Cairo in January to March, I think, 2007. I had not been to Cairo for 20 years, and the boom in Cairo's economy, building, publications, was astonishing. I rode around Cairo in taxi cabs. I walked around Cairo. I didn't recognize the city after 20 years of absence. It was the most, it was as though the city had been built culturally, architecturally, commercially, built from scratch, from a war zone to a modern capital city. I was astonished, and that change reflected itself in the sophistication of the publishing industry in Cairo at that time as well. So thank you very much for the opportunity to address those issues.
Sure. Thank you, Mike. I want to give William or Joan the opportunity to jump in as well, either as it pertains to political and historical events affecting work, or gray literature in the Near East collections as well.
Okay, I'd just like to say a couple comments about political matters. First of all, as part of the U.S. diplomatic mission to Egypt, it's worth mentioning that even at the lowest ebb of U.S.-Egyptian relations, that is from, let's say, 1967 to right before Mike's arrival as field director, the office has never closed.
That's right.
The Library of Congress has always maintained its presence there. Yes, there were times when the ambassador or the chief of mission would not allow the permanent residence of a U.S. field director there, but that role was taken on by a local American resident at the time. And even during the time of the events of 2011, when I was obliged to leave Egypt on ordered departure, the office continued functioning and operating, with regards to whatever else was happening with the country. I mean, honestly, when politics and these issues affect the operation, it's really about how is business affected? How is the book business affected? When we have countries that are under sanctions, under US sanctions, it can be difficult to make a payment to the people who are supplying us with materials for the country, from those countries. So we have to find certain other ways to accomplish this. When we look at critical countries where shipping cannot take place, Yemen is a really good example of that, or even during the time of COVID. I don't need politics. I have very real events where it is impossible to get, a boat or, a cargo plane out with our materials. That also affects our operations. It's really things like that have the impact on our ability to work or our ability to visit a country. If I send someone like Khalid or Ahmed or both out to a country and they're not able to get visas for whatever reason, that also can affect our work. And that's just sort of the day-to-day, realities that when we're talking about on-the-ground library acquisitions, those are the things that affect it. It's not the politics per se, but it's rather the impact of those politics or historical events on the logistics, the ability to do financial transactions. That's where we get affected from.
I if I can show a quick picture, I'll talk about the kind of the political aspects of being on Capitol Hill. I'm going to kind of share this for right now. I found it in my, this is the Library of Congress shortly after January 6th. And here's the fencing that went around the whole entire Capitol Hill compound with razor wire across the top. This is now around the Supreme Court right next to us because of the current Roe v. Wade. And they've taken this down now, but we had to go in through checkpoints to get in to work after January 6th. We reopened all of this now, but all of a sudden last Monday, I was bringing in a big Uzbek delegation with their head of their Senate. And I had told them to drive up in front of the Jefferson building so they could unload and go in the carriage entrance. And I had to call them on Wednesday morning and say, I'm sorry, you now have to drive past and unload in front of the Madison building because they put jersey walls all up and down in front of the Library of Congress, and you can't turn in there anymore. The tractor man came and drove his tractor up next to the Neptune Plaza, and we had to spend hours over at the coffee shop. So it's the territory, it's the way that we're operating. Sometimes our entrances are closed and things like that. COVID was kind of beneficial in a way. We could come in, the reading room was closed, and we spent many hours on site processing the collections and the materials. So in some ways, and we were still able to go in and photocopy PDFs or send out articles until interlibrary loan resolved. So we do face those on a daily basis, but we keep going as far as we can go.
Thank you, Joan, for reminding us that we need not necessarily look to the Middle East as some sort of exception when it comes to political turmoil or public health crisis, when we can look right outside the Library of Congress's doors as well. I want to turn to William with another question. In an essay that you wrote with Ahmed Mustafa, Syed Mustafa, you detail the importance of the Library of Congress Cooperative Acquisitions Program for the building of a national collection of Middle East serials. We often hear discussion about a national collection and how cooperative collecting has a role to play in the construction of a national collection. Perhaps it goes without saying, but I was hoping you might be able to flesh out a little bit more for us what you see the role of the LC office over the Cairo and Nairobi offices playing when it comes to the building of national collection, and cooperative collecting, a future of cooperative collecting moving forward as well.
Okay, thank you. Well, I mean, with regards to a cooperative collecting, that is something that is driven by the Middle East Librarians Association or other area studies organizations or other subgroups that operate. There's different consortiums now starting to develop across the United States, whether it's RECAP in the Northeast or the Big Ten libraries, who are starting now to talk at the not just at the university administrative level, but also at the bibliographer level on, well, given that there's a large amount of materials, it's impossible for any one library to maintain comprehensively in those materials. And this is nothing new. I mean, Mela discussed this at a conference in 1975. And from that, the Cairo office at the time contributed with a list of all the serials that were being provided to participants in the PL 480 program. And that document can be found, cooperative collecting among Middle East libraries, on the MELA website, mela.us. And you can see it there. So this idea, when we talk about serials, there are so many magazines, newspapers, and other academic publications. In the collections in Washington, Joan knows this all too well because she's the recipient of them, that there are many serial publications, and there's just not enough coordination taking place between the libraries to get them. So I think some of this, this drive to, I think Cairo office can definitely play a role in help coordinating and help identifying who is subscribing to what. Of course, we need their, permissions to share that information, but we have the ability to sort of manage that so that it's not just Library of Congress collecting publications. It's not just any 2 or 3 libraries collecting serial publications, but there is an opportunity to collect more broader. And we don't need 20 copies of Al-Ahram newspaper, held by 20 different libraries. We need more diversity and more collecting. I think this can be done again through cooperation. We've seen similar models of success take place in our office in Delhi, in India, for those participants. And I think something is more than possible here as well. And Ahmed and his staff are, definitely able to handle that. Serials tends to be a very expensive undertaking. Not many commercial suppliers like to deal with them because serials and newspapers are largely subsidized by the government. And it takes more effort to go on, say, an acquisition trip or to visit this department or this institute to get their serial publication than it is for the cost of that publication itself. And so that is, I always joke with people that I consider Cairo office to be the EBSCO of the region, because we do maintain serial subscriptions on behalf of all 45 of our participants. Thank you.
Thank you. I want to turn to Joan for this next question. So as we've heard, you've had the ability to view the impact of Public Law 480 and subsequent Library of Congress acquisitions programs from a slightly different vantage point. I was wondering if you might be able to speak to us a little bit more about the impact of PL 480 in shaping the Near East collections at the library and how it continues to shape the materials that the researchers have access to today in the Near East collections. And I guess more specifically to your position, what insights might we be able to learn from looking at the Library of Congress itself rather than the participant libraries in the cooperative acquisitions programs?
Specifically, I think the Public Law 480 has meant, as you saw on William's slide, the Library of Congress received the primary copies of these works that were being acquired for the participant libraries. And the focus of and the scope has greatly increased from our regions. We recently had a Bahrain delegation come in, and they want to see what we get from their collections. And Hoda was able to show them several Bahrain serial publications that had been bound, and we were able to display them. And they, oh, I know who that is. I recognize that person, and that sort of thing. And people are looking for those connections, and we would not have this scope of collections if it weren't for this broad range of collecting that has been engendered through the PL 480 from all of these different countries that, like we're saying, Baghdad under siege, the war effort there, and the challenges of getting collections from Syria now. I think William can speak to that. Those Syrian collections are of great interest to researchers, very difficult to obtain. And to maintain this collecting through all of these different wars, and Iran is particularly difficult. We haven't spoken outside the Cairo office, but our Islamabad office is equally facing, particularly from Afghanistan. We're collecting heavily from that area. These in the region, and I wanted to kind of come across from my own perspective when I was a graduate student at American University. The library was being renovated and rebuilt. And I was able to come into the Library of Congress and find collections for my research, which was on Cyprus and how it was moving away from an integrated country to a more polarized northern tier for Turkey and Greek and all the different sectors. The only place I could find population statistics on Cyprus was at the Library of Congress. And also I want to play up the role of the Middle East Institute Library. Glad it's coming back online because I was able to go into the Middle East Library and borrow books. I was going to night school, trying to fit this all in, and I couldn't take the books out of the Library of Congress. So I want to say that this critical role the Library of Congress has in the scope of collecting, but there's also this role for our Middle East studies libraries all around the country. And these programs have strengthened that research all through that area.
Thank you. Mike or William, you want to jump in?
Be my guest, William.
Yeah, I just wanted to add one thing to sort of touch on what Joan already had mentioned, is that by collecting these materials through PL 480 or MACAP or whatever for the Library of Congress, they do come in handy when they are needed. So a very good example of this is in 1991, following the incident between Iraq and Kuwait, Kuwait had its Ministry of Information sort of provisional government or outside government set up in Cairo. And during that time, the invasion, they lost a full set of their official gazette. And through the efforts of then Field Director Will Tetrello, who I believe is here, they were able to get copies, full run of their official gazette, and present it to the Kuwaitis in Cairo. And that was because the Library of Congress and the Cairo office had been systematically collecting those gazettes to preserve. And now this was an opportunity to sort of repatriate, as it were, a copy back. And that was an incredible activity of goodwill in that way. So that's, again, what the library does in those cases.
Yes, Mike.
I'd like to put in a plug for the Middle East Institute Oman Library. I'm currently involved in research of my own, and I could not do it without two resources. One is Google, and the other is the Middle East Institute Oman Library. And I thank you very much and your predecessors for building such a marvelous collection. I could not have done my work without MEI's Oman Library. The second thing I want to say is I didn't have time in the presentation to expand on give back activities. In my day, all librarians are service-oriented people, and we want to help where we can. The library's resources in Egypt were the envy of Egyptian librarians, and eventually the envy of librarians around the Arab world. So we were constantly, or I was constantly approached about, can you help? Can Library of Congress help? The Library of Congress brass in Washington was constantly on the lookout to avoid mission creep. So we were never allowed to become an aid agency. We were, I think I see William has the same experience, but let me say one thing. William was, for some reason, maybe his persuasiveness or salesmanship, whatever, he had much better success at prevailing on the authorities for outreach. His example of the Kuwaiti official gazette is a great example. Outreach. I think, William, you were constantly on the go giving lectures and training sessions, and the staff pitched in, and Ahmed Mustafa would talk about periodicals, and other people would talk about cataloging, and you were all over the region with this kind of outreach.
Yes, and it's still that way to
Good,
today.
good. Yeah, for some reason or another, you broke the barrier of that what should I say, that barrier from the library about giving back.
We do what we can in whatever, sometimes the smallest ways are the effective ways.
Sure. Thank you for that.
And I'd echo too. We just want to outreach and share the collections and get everyone to come in and use the collections for all the different reasons that you want to know more about this incredible region that we cover, from all the way from, in our division, the tip of Africa, and William's now in African Overseas Office, all the way through Central Asia. And if it isn't the most, to me, it's the most interesting and important area of the world right now. This is where all the major activities back through history. And if you're going to understand this region, it's critical to come in and do the research. And thank you to, again, echoing the Oman Library. That was so instrumental. I could borrow the books and take them home and use them on my scarce hours.
You can still borrow the books
from the library. You can leave them on the reserve shelves, but they still are a component of the major research area.
Great. I want to make sure that we have time to turn to some of the Q&A questions. We mentioned Will Tutrello, and we received a question, so I'm just going to read it out loud. Could the speakers comment on the importance of collecting science and technology materials, impact science and technologies materials impact beyond Middle East studies? Today in the western part of the United States, the issue of lack of water impacts food access. Science and technology articles and books on dry farming from the Middle East may be important for changing farming techniques in the US. So any comments on the acquisitions of science and technology materials that you've worked with?
I'll just make a quick comment. So normally we used to acquire more heavily for the National Library of Agriculture and the National Library of Medicine. National Library of Agriculture sort of withdrew from our MACAP program. They, I think, just for whatever reason. So that kind of left the question of, well, who should pick up the gap? We don't encounter a lot of monographs that are published in what we would call the hard sciences. At least from Middle East. It's a little different here in Nairobi, where such things are talking about applied science in a country. So maybe we would acquire that. I think a lot of that material that would be most relevant would end up in journal articles, and then we would be acquiring it because we're acquiring the journals that those are published in.
Yeah, I would agree with that. And also some of the newspaper coverage. I just actually had we call it Kluge Scholar coming in and looking at environmental issues in the Euphrates, Tigris and Euphrates region, and requesting all kinds of materials. Sometimes it's not exactly a complete book, but it's a book chapter. And so again, this access through the catalog and working with the librarian can identify the sources, the best sources of that type of information. And we are getting some of these publications now that are coming in a digital format. And so they're in this stacks thing, but working with the librarians on the topics can help identify sources for that type of information. So don't hesitate to contact the librarians in either your institution or our institution for Ask a Librarian. It's online and you can pose your question in there and it gets to the librarian that can best answer it with their collections.
I just want to note, in case, just so that it doesn't get missed, we just have a comment from Ahmed Ramadan from Yale University, who's sending his praises for the work that both Mike and William, and as well as the other field directors of the Cairo office have done. Ahmed Ramadan was a staff member of that office in Cairo, and he is particularly grateful of a lot of the efforts and projects that were run during both of your tenure there.
And we're grateful to Ahmed too, right, William?
Yes, that's right.
And we're about ready to hire Ayman Osman from the Cairo office. Sorry,
my
William.
goodness.
Wonderful.
Oh my
wonderful.
goodness. Good.
Another question that we received was asking about whether there are any exchange agreements between Middle East countries and presumably the Library of Congress overseas offices as it pertains to governmental publications. Is that something that the Near East section participates in? Feel free to address that as well.
Okay, they're not. We have a network of exchange partners in several countries, and especially for acquiring government publications, NGO publications, etc. They exist. However, and this is very important to mention, is that more often than not, we are not allowed under MACAP to provide participant libraries with those publications because we're receiving them as gifts. And the MACAP operates in such a way that we have to be able to charge a participant. So if I get a copy of a report from, let's say, annual report from the National Bank of Egypt, and I get that copy for LC, but there are no copies for purchase, I cannot legally get it for participant libraries. So that means Library of Congress would be the owning library. It can happen where it's happened in the past. We haven't done this in a few years, but we may share information about contacts at government, non-government organizations that participant libraries can contact and acquire their publications. Now with the internet, it's, a lot of people can do their own research, or you may find that some of those publications are in fact published online, but we just can't offer that to participants. That's the rules of the program.
If I could jump in here super quickly, we do have our Library of Congress surplus books programs and agreements with all sorts of countries about that book exchanges. I've personally seen them on the shelves in some of the libraries such as Poland, Azerbaijan, and what I can share with the participants super quickly is this looks like it's a little bit messed up today, but I just did a quick Google search. So for anybody who's interested in this for their library, sometimes we get duplicates. I personally have my staff take the duplicates over to the surplus book program. Our participant libraries can sign up for this, and they can take advantage of this exchange. They send us many of their governmental publications, but we also exchange books that are surplus. So I'll stop sharing that super quickly.
Great, thank you, Joan. We are over time, but I hope you might indulge me one last question, if possible. We talked a lot about the breadth and depth of collecting that the Library of Congress did. We've talked as well about the particularities of working within the publishing world or with the publishing world in the Middle East, and the massive diversity that exists within the region. A lot of knowledge that's produced from within the Middle East doesn't necessarily fit neatly into contemporary state borders, and isn't always confined to majority or state languages. I recently read a chapter in an edited volume that I would recommend on area studies librarianship that's titled "The Collector and the Collected." It was recently published by Litwin Press, and one of the authors discussed what he called a ladder of languages, that is an often unconscious hierarchical bias among librarians for majority languages. So I was wondering how the Library of Congress makes sure that it acquires materials from non-dominant languages or from small publishers or other producers of knowledge that might be lacking in state support.
In the PL 480 days, with regard to Egypt, there was not a lot of freedom of the press and freedom to publish. So in the what came out from minorities, whether they were religious minorities or considered religious fringe groups, or people who just didn't have the resources to publish it in a commercial way, those materials we acquired. There's no prejudice against what you call majority languages. So if we saw it, we got it. And we actually proactively went out looking for it. When there was a demonstration, we would be in the demonstration collecting their pamphlets and broadsides. So there was no prejudice against this language or that group or what have you. The Library of Congress's collection of Coptic publications, both periodical and book in book form, is probably as comprehensive as any place in the world, current Coptic publishing, and that completeness is true of every other available minority language throughout the region.
Super quickly, I can talk very quickly about the Endangered Alphabets Program project that's just now getting underway, and talk about the fact that we cataloged in over 480 languages, and many of our catalogers speak or have access to 8 or 9 languages. So if I can quickly share this program, and I just Google searched this. If I can, oh gosh, I'm trying to bring it up here quickly. If you Google search Africa Beyond Writing, it's all about the Endangered Alphabets project, and it's a video program 3-part that just took place, and you can Google search it for more information about why all these endangered alphabets are and how we're trying to preserve those in the indigenous culture through their educational materials. So I'll stop sharing that.
William, did you want to offer any comments, or you think?
Yeah, I mean, of course, if we have the capacity to process the language, in other words, if we have someone on staff who is able to handle the language, of course, we do actively try to collect in what would be otherwise, from North Africa, it would be Berber languages. I don't have anyone on staff who can handle Amazigh specifically, but we do try to collect what we can in the hopes that one day we will have a way to process. A good example here in Nairobi is I recently acquired some 82 publications from Somalia, and that was a considerable number considering the situation there. I don't have anyone on staff who can process it, but I was able to engage with, let's just say, a local contractor to help us transcribe some of the bibliographic information so that we create cataloging records, and now those books are fully cataloged. So yes, we do actively try to make sure that minority publications, even sometimes self-published books, which would maybe from a US collecting perspective might be questionable, but in certain countries of our region, self-published authors are sometimes the only way information about a topic will get out. And for that, of course, you have to know the author in order to acquire. So we do try to ferret out as best as we can things that have research value, lasting research value, that are necessary for the collection. And we don't just focus on the commercial or academic publishers, mainstream commercial or academic publishers of a country. Thank you.
Thank you so much. I want to thank all of our panelists for their presentation and for this lively discussion. And a thank you too to everyone who's attended and for the engaged questions that we received. I hope that this event can serve as a springboard, as I've said, for further discussions around collecting, around PL 480, area studies, and the history of libraries during the Cold War in other fora. As you may have noticed, this talk has been recorded and it will be posted on YouTube and on the Middle East Institute's website afterwards. So you're welcome to rewatch it and to share it with your friends and colleagues. Also, as a reminder, the Middle East Institute's Oman Library will be holding a book sale and open house tomorrow, Thursday, June 23rd, as well as Friday, June 24th, from 10 a.m. to 5 p.m. And if you're in the DC area, please drop by and pay us a visit. And just want to say thank you so much again to everyone. Take care. William, I saw that you had a hand raised.
Yeah, sorry, that was an accidental click.
Sure. Okay. Thank you so much.